So yeah, he has a summary at the beginning of the chapter, then you have the body of the text, and then you have a summary in paragraph form at the end of the chapter. And then within the body of the text, there are these little exercises. And what I'm going to do is, at least for this first chapter, there's 3 exercises, and we're going to do them in class. So if you don't have the book, cool. We can just think about these things in class doing the exercises. As we get into later chapters, there'll be more exercises at the end, and it'll be opportunities to test out the principles and try out the processes and learn as you go. So, hermeneutics. Hermeneutics. That sounds like a funny word. It's the process by which we discover the author's intended meaning of a given text. So, this will become really important. The author's intended meaning. And what we're trying to find is this, is the meaning of the text. So we have words, in this case on the screen, and we can read them, but what is meant by these words? That's what we're trying to get at. We're trying to understand what the meaning is. Anthony Thistleton, he's a commentator, biblical commentator, explains that hermeneutics is, quote, it explores how we read, understand, and handle texts, especially those written in another time or in a context of life different from our own. Biblical hermeneutics investigates more specifically how we read, understand, apply, and respond to biblical texts. So what he's saying is we got to read. That's the first step. You got to read it. Read, understand, and apply. And then apply. And then, once it's applied, there's actually a response needed. And so we're supposed to respond as well. That's kind of the process. You read it, you have to come to an interpretation, come to an understanding. So it's like you read, find the data in the text, what is it saying? And it's almost like you need to read it and summarize it to yourself. Like, what did this actually say? What's actually here? Then from there you can come to have an understanding. And from there, once you have an understanding of what it meant to the author's intended meaning. So, and this is where it becomes, the time element becomes important. The people that lived during the time that the Bible was written lived at a very different time than our own. And they have a very, many times, very different understanding of the world than what we have. So that's what we need to understand, is how they understood what's being talked about then. Then we can apply it to ourselves. It's only when we understand what it meant to them then that we can apply it to ourselves, and then we have the opportunity to respond once the application is made. But all of those steps, super important. Just more fleshing out definitions, or a definition for hermeneutics. Hermeneutics is the science and the art of biblical interpretation. The science and the art. And it's like, those seem opposed to each other. Like, kind of. Science, it's a set of rules. So there's a process. It's an orderly system that you can follow and discover the meaning of a text. But it's an art as well, because communication is very flexible. Very flexible. The same statement said in a certain tone can mean the exact opposite of what the statement literally says. It's like, you didn't brush your teeth? Right? Or actually, I should put it in the positive. You brushed your teeth? What am I meaning? I don't think you brushed your teeth. Right? It's like, no. Even just like that kind of thing, it changes the understanding of what the text is, or what's being said, what needs to be understood. So because communication is super flexible, it's more of an art on how to apply those principles, the orderly system, the set of rules. We could also call it applied exegesis. Applied exegesis. Exegesis, like, whoa, that sounds like a funny word. It is a funny word. It basically means like meaning that's coming out of the text. The contrast to that is called eisegesis, and that means you're reading something into the text. And if you're not careful, then, and you're listening to, preachers can fall into this very easily. They can just like read what they want into a text and say that that's what it means. And it's like, that's the danger of going from here to here too quickly. It's like, oh, I know what I want people to hear. I know what I want to say about this thing. Let me find a text that's kind of like that, and then pump all of the things that I want to say into that text. It's like, well, is that what Paul was actually talking about in 1 Corinthians 6? When he was writing that letter to the Corinthian church at that time? Is that what he meant when he said that? Maybe, maybe not. But let me just go find a text and fill it with what I want to say. That's eisegesis. What we want is exegesis, which is deriving meaning out of the text. So the text is on the top, and I am subject to it. The text is above me. I need to understand what it's saying, not making it say what I want it to say. We seek to understand the author's intended meaning and apply it to our lives today. So, again, a quote from the book, from Verkler. Quote, hermeneutics is essentially a codification of those processes we normally use on a subconscious level to understand the intended meaning of another person. So, we use these processes and principles all the time, and we don't even think about it because we live in the same culture, the same point in history, and we understand the references of each other. And because we do that, we don't have to think about how to understand what the person we're talking to is saying. But we are enacting all these principles. We just don't realize it's kind of on an unconscious or subconscious level. Back to the quote. Only when something blocks our spontaneous understanding of another person's message do we recognize the need for some method of understanding what the person intended. And there's lots of things that could block our immediate spontaneous understanding of what someone is trying to say. What could those be? Exercise number 1. Yeah. Cool. All right, so to be an informed citizen, you probably regularly read articles or listen to people talk on podcasts or YouTube talking heads, or fill in the blank with whatever kind of news source that you listen to. Do you typically have trouble understanding what that source is trying to tell you?
Yes.
Sometimes, yes? I guess, well, so hold on to that, because when we compare it to other examples, maybe it won't be as difficult. Are you typically aware of the hermeneutical process that you utilize to understand an article that you might read? And it's probably not, at least not here. So I grabbed an article. This is a very recent one. So it was written on the 15th. This is from reason.com, and it's a libertarian kind of political leaning website. So Oklahoma opens Office of Religious Liberty and Patriotism. And then it has the subtitle, the taxpayer-funded office will investigate cases where religious freedom is trampled on while the state implements biblical study into the curriculum. Oh, whoops. Those are other examples. I don't want you to see those. All right, so on Tuesday, Ryan Walters, Oklahoma State's Superintendent of Public Instruction, announced the creation of an Office of Religious Liberty and Patriotism at the Oklahoma Department of Education. Advertised as a way to protect freedom of religion, this office will impose Orwellian-like practices that trample individual choice and religious freedom. So, And that statement right there, when he says Orwellian-like practices, does everybody understand what he means by that? Okay, so Orwell was a writer in the I think was it the 60s? No. Anyways, a little bit ways back. Anyways, he wrote 1984, which is a classic text for like dystopian government authoritarian control, and it's where we get the phrases of like doublespeak and wrong think and any of those things where the government has a heavy hand in in practices that trample freedom essentially, and they use they use the power of the government to force people into thinking a certain way, and they use heavy propaganda throughout the entire book so that's what it's referring. It's like, oh, this guy, you can see his opinion about what's happening here, right, in that one statement. And then it goes right back to like kind of facts. Taxpayer-funded office will be tasked with promoting religious liberty and patriotism in Oklahoma by protecting parents, teachers, and students' abilities to practice their religion freely in all aspects, and will also oversee the investigation of abuses to individual religious freedom or displays of patriotism, per a press release from Walters. And if you're reading it on the website, you could click on that and see the press release. Oklahoma's Department of Education has a history of ignoring the separation of church and state in public schools. Last year, high school class in Skiatook removed a prominent display of John 3:16 after the Freedom from Religion Foundation, an organization that advocates for atheists, agnostics, and non-theists, filed a complaint on behalf of community members. In July, Walters unveiled guidelines for how to teach the Bible in Oklahoma schools after he had ordered the inclusion of the Bible in history curriculums just a month prior. Quote, "Every teacher, every classroom in the state will have a Bible in the classroom and will be teaching from the Bible in the classroom," Walters stated in June. By September, during the Oklahoma State Board of Education meeting, Walters had requested a total of $6 million to purchase the 55,000 Bibles needed for Oklahoma schools. At the time, the only biblical texts that met Walters' criteria were King James Version Bibles that included the Pledge of Allegiance, Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, and U.S. Bill of Rights. The Bible was also required to be bound in leather or leather-like material. According to the Oklahoma Watch, only 2 Bibles fit the original requirements by the Oklahoma Department of Education, both of which had been endorsed by the Trump family, and one of which Donald Trump received compensation for his endorsement. So just right there, are you interpreting anything? Right? It's like, why was it important to mention Trump? Why was that important? Maybe because this person has a bias and is trying to influence the reader in a certain direction. What was the author's intended meaning there? Was it just an innocent mention of President-elect Donald Trump?
It's irrelevant.
Right, exactly. So
It's just pushing you to think more.
there you go. Yeah, just trying to get you to think. By October, thanks to a flood of criticism, new guidelines were released that eased the narrow requirements and allowed copies of American founding documents to be provided separately from the Bible. Walters had called public schools ground zero for the erosion of religious liberty across our country, and claims that this directly correlates with the declining academic outcomes of our public schools. Notice, no commentary on those quotes. In the announcement, Walter also revealed the Office of Religious Liberty and Patriotism was designed to align with Trump's Freedom to Pray initiative and to ensure that both student and teachers' rights to prayer are protected and upheld. Again, why are we mentioning that guy? It's interesting. So, Superintendent Walters' stated goal, and this is where he finishes up with kind of his own interpretation of what's going on here. Superintendent Walters' stated goal of promoting religious freedom runs contrary to the mandate of Bibles in public schools. That's an argument. He's making his point. Instead of advancing religious liberty, as the Office of Religious Liberty and Patriotism claims, it will likely promote more religious intervention and state endorsement of certain religious expressions. i.e. a Christian one. So, remember, so then, right, so you might read that and go, I don't have a problem with that. But just by trying to understand what he's talking about, it's like, okay, we have this new, in Oklahoma, we have this new office, right, of religious liberty and patriotism, and it's claiming to protect religious freedom. Well, this author is claiming it's doing the exact opposite. It's endorsing, and I don't think, he doesn't use the word forcing, but it's instead of just allowing people to do their own thing, it's going to endorse one religious view, which from the perspective of people that are writing for this website, reason.com, it should be like there shouldn't be any endorsement of any kind of religion at all, which is why they mentioned the Freedom from Religion Foundation in here. It's like, well, what about those people who want to be free from religion? What are they supposed to practice? And there's this, what I'm getting at is, if you read this and you don't have in the back of your mind this already secular divide of these two things shall never touch, secular rights and religious ideas. If that's the divide that you have in your mind, then everything follows. But if that's not the divide that you have, or if you're like, I think the religious values are prior to these political ones, then is that such a bad thing? And I mean, you could investigate what kind of teaching, but it also has this idea of the separation of church and state, right? How many times have you heard that phrase used? And which direction does the separation of church and state usually get used in our day?
Separate the church.
Say what?
Allow the state. Separate the church, allow the state.
Yeah, so it's don't let the church influence the state.
Which is not what
Which
the
is the
intent
other way
ever
around.
was.
Huh, interesting. January 1st, 1802, the response to the Danbury Baptist Association. Like, I wanted to pull this up, one, because the language is very different than the way that we speak, and I found that interesting. Again, if we're trying to understand an author's intended meaning, and they use very long sentences and lots of prepositional clauses, and like, it's like, oh, trying to keep track of the argument will be more difficult, and it'll take more work to understand what the author is trying to say. Like, everything up here was pretty straightforward, roughly, right? All of the sentences were pretty easy to understand, I think. Part of that is because it was written in our day, and this is the kind of language that we use all the time. And so there's fewer roadblocks to understanding, right? And what Verkler's getting at is the processes that we usually use on a subconscious level to understand the intended meaning. When something blocks that, then we become aware of the processes and principles that we need to use to understand a text. So there weren't too many blocks in this news article. Maybe the Orwellian thing, if you didn't know who Orwell was and that he wrote 1984, like that would be a block. You would have to do a little bit of research to understand what he meant by that. That's hermeneutics. Like, you're trying to understand what the author said, so you might have to do a little background research. If I wanted to really, really dig deep, I would click all of these links where he has all these things, and it's like, okay, now I can get a better understanding of what the person said. Maybe the quotes that he has, right, ground zero for the erosion of religious liberty across our country, maybe that's taken out of context. I would want to maybe read the whole thing that the person said and see if he quoted him appropriately, or maybe not. Again, that's all hermeneutics. That's all the process of that. So, suppose we were to read Thomas Jefferson's response to the Danbury Baptist Association, written in January 1st, 1802. Do you think it's more likely that you'll become more aware of the hermeneutical process or less aware? All right, so let's look at it. because this is really cool. Oh, man. So, here it is. Gentlemen, the affectionate sentiments of esteem and approbation which you are so good as to express towards me, on behalf of the Danbury Baptist Association, give me the highest satisfaction. My duties dictate a faithful and zealous pursuit of the interests of my constituents, and in proportion as they are persuaded of my fidelity to those duties, the discharge of them becomes more and more pleasing. Already are some of you going like, what did he just say there? It's like, I might have to read that again to understand what he meant by what he said. Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or his worship, that the legislative powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people which declared that their legislators should, quote, make no laws respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state. Adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore to man all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. I reciprocate your kind prayers for the protection and blessings of the common Father and Creator of man, and tender you for yourselves and your religious association assurances of my high respect and esteem. Thomas Jefferson. So already, like just immediately, what differences do you notice between the first text that we read and this one?
No commentary.
No commentary, right. So
Trump's nowhere to be seen.
Trump's nowhere to be seen. What's up with that? Thank you so much. Oh, that's so good. Oh, man, I love it. There's no commentary. So, are these different genres of writing? Okay, well, that influence how you understand them. Right, this is a letter to a specific, to the Danbury Baptist Association. And the other one was an article written for the masses to read, right? So already that's why Trump's not in there. Man. If only. That's the only reason, yeah. Has nothing to do that it was written in 1802. Nothing to do with that, right? But what if this was taken away and all you had was this? You didn't have the historical context. Would you be able to have a good understanding of it?
You might be able to discern that it was from that time period.
Right, you'd have to do a little research, but it would take a little bit more work to understand. Already, like just reading the first little paragraph, it's like the affectionate sentiments of esteem and approbation which you are so good to express towards me on behalf of the Danbury Association, a Baptist Association, give me the highest satisfaction. Like, thank you for thinking well of me. Right. I mean, that's basically what he's saying, right? But he says it in all of these other words. Yeah. It's the way that people wrote back then is not the same way that people wrote today, or write today. Like, not at all.
Person doesn't write like this today.
But did the average person write like that back then?
Yes.
Hmm.
Well, at least the educated.
Right. So what? Yes. So that's a good point. The average person or the educated person? How did they write?
Educated, yes.
Right. So there is a difference here. So we might even be able to recognize a class difference, maybe, right? But knowing that it's Thomas Jefferson makes a difference, right? Knowing that who he's writing to helps us understand what's going on. It also helps us to understand what he meant by this, the separation between church and state. Was his concern that the church would influence the state? No, just read it, right? I contemplate with sovereign reverence the act of the whole American people which declared that their legislator should make no law respecting establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. The concern with that is that the state would enforce rules on the church. It's the other way around. But if almost anytime you hear somebody talk about it today, they'll quote that one phrase out of this one letter that was written to the Danbury, a representative of the Danbury Baptist Association, and they flip it. So it's taken out of context and then used for a different purpose. It's like, but you might not know that if you had never read this. And again, it changes your understanding of what did the author intend. Now I know the intentions of the original author. I know that the person that's twisting this is twisting this because that's not what Jefferson intended. Let's go to the next example. And I wanted to read this, well, one, because the article before mentioned separation of church and state, and I was like, oh, let's pull this up. It's also because the language is like, we don't read and write like this. Most people don't read and write like this. And it's like you almost need to take a second to gain an understanding of what the author is getting at, and that's hermeneutics, right? It's you read and you try and understand. And those principles and processes that we use to understand, that's hermeneutics. But we could do the same thing with the Bible, right? And this is what we're getting to. 1 Corinthians 6:12. All things are lawful to me, but all things are not expedient. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be brought under the power of any. What does expedient mean?
Good for you.
Good for you.
Instant.
Instant. Okay. What'd you say, Miss Perry?
I just say good.
You just say
Like
good?
Profitable.
Profitable. Okay. Excellent. So good for you, like quickly, that kind of thing, right? Like, is expedient a word that we usually use? No. So that's going to be something that, I need to look that up maybe if I don't understand what it means, if I'm going to understand what Paul's talking about when he's writing to the Corinthians. All things are lawful for me. What does he mean by lawful? Ooh. So like if we just look up the definition of the term lawful, the way that he's using it is maybe more than what the definition necessarily is giving us. And what I mean by that is he's interpreting something. He has a theological interpretation locked in with using that word. I mean, yeah, it's like all things are lawful? Huh. All things? And then there's the whole, like, is he quoting a phrase that the Corinthians say all the time to justify their actions? If he's just quoting them and responding to the quote, then that changes how we understand it as well. Meats for the belly and belly for meats. If that's like, could you hear someone saying that, trying to justify fornication? Look, I mean, we eat food, body gets hungry, we need food. I mean, right? I mean, you guys eat, right? Meat for the belly, yeah.
The second part is going to the work and doing the work.
Yeah. But God shall destroy both it and them. Now, the body is not for fornication. That's his point. But he's referring to this phrase, meats for the belly, belly for meats.
I think that could be comparable to the YOLO nowadays.
See, right. You're getting here, right? Yeah, you are. So you're taking what Paul meant, understanding what he meant, and then going, okay, what does that look like today? What's the similar thing that we might say today? And then when you're like sharing your message or like you're teaching or preaching or whatever, whenever you're doing that, it's like you could use that phrase because people that will communicate the same truth that's right here to the people that you're talking to. As long as it means the same thing, then yeah, use it. And it'd be great. And then when they hear you say YOLO, they'll laugh, right? Because it's like, whoa. Like if Gerald's up here, like, YOLO! If I do that, some of you smiled. Right? You're like, oh, Gerald's being ridiculous. Yes, I do that sometimes. However, that's going to get lodged in your brain. You're going to be like, oh, yeah. Maybe that's what it's talking about. I should think about that. Now, the body is not for fornication, but for the Lord. Ooh, that was a little quick. I should. And the Lord for the body. And God hath both raised up the Lord and will also raise up us by his own power. So, what you do in the body matters because your body is coming back. The resurrection is true. But you have to parse these things out. Let's jump down to something that's, all right. Know ye not that your bodies are members of Christ? Verse 15. Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a harlot? God forbid. What? Know ye not that he which is joined to a harlot is one body? For two, saith he, shall be one flesh. So now he's going back to Genesis and saying that the sexual union is this one flesh union. But he's already talked about how your body is connected with Christ. And so you're bringing Christ to be with a harlot. What are you doing? God forbid. But he that is joined unto the Lord is of one spirit. Flee fornication. Every sin that a man doeth is without the body, but he that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. What does that mean? A man doeth, every sin that a man doeth is without the body.
He made a conscious decision in his mind.
The only reason I raise that question is to get you to go, would I need to do a little bit more study to understand what Paul is talking about? If the answer is yes, you're already entering into hermeneutics. That's what I'm trying to show here. And it's like there's some of the English in the King James is kind of difficult to understand. It's like you're going to have to do a little bit more study just to understand it. That's hermeneutics. That's great. That's what we want. That's good stuff. I think we're going to have to skip. Oh. All right. A Holy Sonnet by John Donne. Batter my heart. What's the first thing you notice already? What kind of literature is this? All right, yeah. So it's poetry. And that's going to be different than if you're just reading an article, right? I hate poetry. Oh, sir. There's so much of the Bible that's poetic. All right, batter my heart, three-person God. For you, and again, I should say, this is a sonnet. And in English literature, a sonnet is like a romantic poem. And so he's writing a poem to God, a sonnet to God, which is interesting. A love poem to God. Batter my heart, three-person God, for you, as yet but knock, breathe, shine, and seek to mend, that I may rise and stand, or throw me, and bend your force to break, blow, burn, and make me new. I, like a usurped town to another do, labor to admit you, but oh, to no end. Reason, your viceroy in me should defend, but is captived and proves weak or untrue. Yet dearly I love you, and would be loved fain, but am betrothed unto your enemy. Divorce me, untie, or break that knot again. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. Like, whoa. So he's describing what's very similar to Paul's description of the battle that he has in Romans 7. It's similar to that, but in a love poetry type way. He's betrothed to God's enemy. And so he says, divorce me from that, untie me and break that knot again, take me to you, and make me a captive of you, Lord, or else I'll never be free. And he's using the language of imprisonment to actually describe his freedom, which is the poetic flip and reversal, which is so great. But already, like, just the cadence of it is very different. It's poetry, so it's also very different. And it would take a little more reading and trying to parse out what's being said here to gain understanding of what the author is intending to convey. All of that is hermeneutics. Example of hermeneutics. So, what would be some blocks to gaining understanding of a text? Language. Yeah.
And not just so much language, but your education.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like, you go to college and know all these books, or you can just have a high school education, or maybe you didn't finish school. So that's going to make a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
How much you understand.
Yeah. So
your
maybe
education.
level of education.
Like not having access to anything from the past, like, or books or something.
Okay. So what would be, like, what kind of books would you be referring to?
Or even the Bible. In some countries, if the Bible is banned, you don't have access to literature or things like that to compare.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe get a hold of a Bible in a country where they're banned, but you don't, I don't know. Who doesn't keep Bible or anything?
Right, no.
You don't have access to any historical,
Yeah.
anything to
Yeah.
compare things to.
Historical context. But if you don't have access to resources that give you the historical context in which the author lived, it'll be a little bit more difficult to understand.
Like back in, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
About your environment.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, environment. Okay.
Like
What
your
about...
social, your society,
yeah.
because if you don't
Okay.
have a like worldview, you could just be like, wait, what?
Okay,
Divorce,
yeah.
Ravish? What, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
not-
Yeah, what does ravish mean?
Yeah.
Also, it's like, that seems like, it's like, oh, I think I know what that means. That's pretty extreme language. He's writing to God? What does that mean? Which, poetry. So in environment, let's see, yeah.
But also, it's going to have something to do too with your personal interest and your personal bias, because somebody already pointed out, I hate poetry. Are they going to read that and want to figure it out? No, they're going to go, this stinks.
No,
Go away.
I hate this. Why are we doing this? I don't like poetry. Why am I taking a creative writing class in college? I guess it's foisted upon me because it's a liberal arts college, or whatever, right? So a couple of other differences. So culture, and this kind of gets at it, but philosophy. The people of the people in the Thomas Jefferson's day had a clear worldview that our culture is getting away from, and so we need to be aware of their understandings of what they're saying and why they're saying it, because it comes from a different worldview than now ours is moving towards. The culture of people in Moses' day, very different. The culture of Egypt, out of which they were pulled, is very different than what God was trying to get them to live by when he gave them the law. Very different. Understanding those cultural differences will help us understand what Moses wrote in the Pentateuch. All of those things are things that may hinder our understanding of a given text. And so we need to apply principles and ask certain questions to get at the understanding of what the text is saying. But not just what the text is saying that I think it means, what the author's intended meaning is. And we'll come back to that next week, where it's like, it's we're searching for the author's intended meaning, and how relativism in the realm of, what's the word I'm thinking of? In the realm of kind of hermeneutics makes it impossible to know because instead of looking for a singular meaning of what the author intended, it's more of, well, what does it mean to me? Well, which interpretation is going to be valid? Well, mine is. Well, what if yours is different? Well, yours is just as valid as mine. But is it really? I don't think Paul meant that at all. Well, it doesn't matter what Paul said, because this is what it means to me when I read it. It's well, if every interpretation is valid, how can, what? How are we going to determine what we should do about it? More of that next week. Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, thank you so much for just getting into this lesson. Thank you for the feedback from the class. Lord, I pray that it whets people's appetite and they're ready to dig into your word. I'm hopeful that it's exciting. Lord, be with us as we go upstairs and we worship you. Lord, help us to have our hearts ready to worship you and our minds clear. Lord, may our hearts be that fertile soil that's ready to receive the implanted word, that it can bear fruit in our lives. Lord, help us to sing praises to your name and be grateful for what you've done for us. And Lord, be grateful for your word, that we can know who you are and what you've done for us through the gospel of Jesus Christ. In Jesus' name, amen.